really will make made the code more competitive on the corporate side and so on. So I think that has to be considered pretty much the highlight of Congress, though there are several others that don't get as much attention, like scaling back Dodd-Frank regulations on community banks, like the recent criminal justice reform package, in the Senate, the judiciary revamp. I think there is a lot to point to on conservative accomplishments.
Kim, how do you see this Congress?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Mitch McConnell and all of the things that Kate just mentioned. And the Speaker touched on it briefly. Don't forget Congress's role, which was monumentally important in rolling back a number of those big last-minute Obama regulations. And their tool for that was something called the Congressional Review Act. It'd never really been used before. They used it more than a dozen times. But to the extent that our Federal Register is actually smaller these days, the list of pages of regulations, Congress had a huge part in that as well, too. And to me, that has probably been as single and effective aspect of this economic revival we're seeing as the tax reform.
I guess, Dan, big failure, health care, failing to repeal and replace Obamacare. Though they did get the mandate repealed, the individual mandate, but that's compared to the big thing, not that large. And then the failure on entitlement reform, they had a chance, historic chance, to do something about Medicaid and reduce the costs going forward, and they failed.
Yeah, the entitlement reform is a big one because Medicare and Social Security spending are not going away. You know, the president says he's obsessed with trade deficits. Well, we got to bring a big spending deficit here in the United States, and entitlements are the reason. But the two big political failures were indeed health care and indeed not doing a deal on immigration and Dreamers in the middle of the year, which would have gotten the president about $24 billion for that wall. Both of those issues fed into the midterm elections, especially health care, which hurt a lot of Republicans running out there. So that was part of the things that did not get done. But I should just want to say very quickly, Paul, that tax bill, as Mr. Ryan said, biggest in 31 years, those are such a heavy lift. Getting the U.S. corporate rate down to 21% and the result that we've seen in the uplift in the American economy has just got to be a stellar part of his legacy.
It broke that logjam that corporate rate was providing Mary at 35%, highest in the developed world. That'll be a legacy that I think Democrats will have a hard time overturning. They'll want to raise the rates, but it won't be as easy as they think.
Yeah, and it's obviously affected business investment, and it explains really the pickup in the economy this year. I mean, I think when I look at it, I think Paul Ryan was the right person at the right time because he's very wonky, so he knows all this stuff inside and out. But the other day I watched his opening speech for the 115th Congress, and it was remarkable, you know, how conciliatory he was, how he tried to reach out to Democrats. I mean, I think he had a real sort of skill in herding these cats, and I think that he gets a lot of credit for having gotten that tax reform.
You know, Kate, some of the President Trump supporters aren't going to like to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I think many of President Trump's most important accomplishments, tax reform, deregulation, the military spending bill, judges, those are the traditional conservative Republican agenda. And if you look at the things that were supposed to be the populist Trump agenda, trade, for example, immigration restrictionism, those either are failures so far or at best they're a work in progress. So I think you got to give Trump's going to miss Paul Ryan a lot when he has to face Nancy Pelosi across the table.
I mean, right. I think to Mary's point about the right person at the right time, Paul Ryan spent years kind of pulling together a binder of ideas that it was really detailed called his Better Way plan. And you look through it, and of course he didn't accomplish everything. I think in particular on anti-poverty programs, I think Paul Ryan would have liked to do more to make those promote work and advancement more than they do now. But you look at a lot of it, like tax reform, and you see that he really was able to accomplish a lot of that. And it's easy to forget now that when A Better Way, when that document came out, it was really glibly dismissed as kind of outdated or impossible to pass or just fantasy. And now we see a lot of it as law.
Kim, what about the criticism of Paul Ryan from the left, that he wasn't critical enough of Donald Trump on a matter of personal behavior and statements? Is that a fair rap in your view?
No, it's not fair because, look, whether or not they agree on everything, Donald Trump and Paul Ryan belong to the same party. And one of Paul Ryan's jobs, especially because the president wasn't necessarily going to do it, was to make sure that that relationship endured for the benefit of these policies that we're talking about and these legislative victories. So, look, Paul Ryan, and by the way, he did call out the president, especially on things that he thought were very serious in which the president was going in the wrong direction on issues of trade, on issues of foreign policy. So he marked out some places where he had his distinctions and differences, but his overall goal was to make sure that things continue to work. And to your point, to the extent that Congress actually passed things, they were more of the Ryan mold and in the traditional conservative mold. It wasn't as if you saw the Congress bending over passing a lot of populist Trump-driven agenda.
All right, thank you very much. Still ahead, Wall Street's wild ride continues. The stocks get set to close out the year. So is signs of strength in 2018 with GDP growth projected to top 3% for the year. But amid stock market volatility and continuing concerns over a trade war with China, what should we expect in the new year? Let's ask Steve Moore. He served as a senior economic advisor to the 2016 Trump campaign and is co-author of the new book, Trump-onomics. So, Steve, let's look at the market, stock market volatility, ups and downs, multiple hundreds of points, sometimes in the same day. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that it's a result of a couple factors, Paul. I mean, one is the trade war with China, which was a very uncertain future. I think at this point, China has, 60 days or so to come up with some concessions. I think Trump is fighting the right fight here. I think China is increasingly a big problem on the international economic scene, and we've been involved in an abusive relationship. I think one thing that investors haven't been maybe taking total account of is that if Trump could pull something off in 2019, where they get a trade deal that actually could lower tariffs, I think you'd see a boom in the stock market and real jubilation by investors. The other factor, of course, is the Fed. I think the Fed has made two big errors in the last 3 or 4 months in terms of raising interest rates at a time when we have basically full employment, no inflation, wage gains. Everything was going great with the economy. Why did the Fed have to mess this up?
All right, let me interrupt here because
okay.
You got the president. Is that helping? Even if he's right on the Federal Reserve with his criticism, which you clearly think he is he helping investors and confidence by bashing the chairman of the Fed, Jay Powell, in personal terms?
Well, it doesn't have to be personal, but I think he's absolutely right to say, look, we've passed pro-growth tax reform, pro-growth regulation. We got the economy, in as healthy a shape as we've had in 20 years. And the Fed comes in with rate increases that have actually, in my opinion, caused a deflation. And when you ask me what are the problems on 2019, I'm really worried about the deflationary effect of these interest rate hikes. So I think that the president is absolutely, it's proper for him to say, why is the Fed doing this? Now, whether he could fire the Fed chairman, I think that's probably been taken off the table. But I think the Fed really should be reversing some of these policy mistakes.
Yeah, but when you talk about maybe I regret my decision to hire Powell, and you do such in a public fashion, a lot of people say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I remember when Robert Rubin was Treasury Secretary, he obviously wanted to influence Alan Greenspan, but they did it by bringing him into the Oval Office and having dinner and sitting down and kind of doing it behind the scenes. I don't know that this public, I think in some ways, you may disagree, and if you do, please say so, but I think the public beating up on Jay Powell before this recent Fed meeting made it harder for Powell not to raise rates.
Well, if you're right about that, and you may be, how irresponsible is that the Fed would intentionally wreck the economy to establish its independence?
Well, I don't think they're trying to wreck the economy, Steve.
Well, I just don't think there was any case whatsoever for this latest rate increase. And by the way, the market has spoken, right? So it was a major, major mistake. And look, as I said, the economy, show me where the inflation is in the economy. I mean, you and I think, both believe the major role of the Fed is to keep prices stable.
Right.
And they haven't done that. If you look at, I was looking at, of the 34 major commodities, like 27 of them have been falling in price. Look at oil, look at copper, look at soybeans, look at wheat, look at steel, look at lead. I mean, when you get falling prices like that, that can, as you and I know, falling prices can be as big of a problem for the economy as when we had the big inflation in the 1970s.
But some of that is because of slowing global demand.
I don't know about that.
And, all right, but look, there's no question that the global economy is slowing. All right. I want to ask you, how strong is the U.S. economy right now, the American economy right now? Because we're going to have the 3% growth, first time above 3% since 2005. But if you look at the fourth quarter, it seems to be decelerating. How much is it decelerating?
First of all, let's celebrate this amazing 2018 economy. I just wrote a column called 2018, the Year of the Worker, and it really was. I mean, investors did poorly this year, but boy, did workers do better. I mean, in fact, we've got the best job market maybe in 50 years for workers. We've got, the lowest unemployment rate for blacks and Hispanics and all workers in something like 50 years. We've finally got those wage gains that we've been looking for. In fact, that's one of the problems with the Fed and why Trump is so frustrated. We finally got wage gains for the first time in 20 years, and the Fed seems wanting to pull those back. So for workers, it's been a good year. In 2019, I think it really depends so much on whether Trump can pull out this trade deal with China. I think that has the biggest impact by far in terms of where this economy is headed.
As you talk to your sources in the White House, has the president decided he wants a deal?
He's confident. I did talk to the president a couple of weeks ago. He seemed very confident that China was going to come to the table. Now, look, who knows what Beijing is going to do with that regime? But their stock market is down 30% this year. They've been hurt by those tariffs. And Trump believes in leverage. That's one thing I think people have to understand about him. He believes that the leverage that he's gaining from these tariffs, and look, I'm a free trade guy, but he believes this is going to bring China to the table. He thinks he's going to get a call from President Xi probably sometime when we get near that deadline. And Xi says, let's make a deal. And that would be the best for the United States, for China, and the rest of the world economy.
All right, but it sounds as if that call doesn't come, or if he can't get a deal, now we could have a much worse 2019. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I don't see Trump backing off on that 25% tariffs that he's threatened, and that would cause a global trade war. So the stakes are. I'm not discounting this. The stakes are really high here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Steve. Still ahead, the Mueller probe now well into its second year, but is the special counsel any closer to proving collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? And with Democrats set to take control of the House, are congressional investigations about to heat up? Throughout his first 2 years in office, charges of collusion between his campaign and the Russians. So with investigations likely to heat up in the new Democratic-controlled Congress and with special counsel Robert Mueller's sprawling probe set to continue into the new year, what have we learned so far about the Trump-Russia connection? We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and Kate Batchelder Odell. So, Kim, let's first just focus on the Russia collusion, the Trump-Putin conspiracy alleged to defeat Hillary Clinton. Have we learned any more factual basis to prove or disprove that allegation?
Absolutely nothing, at least nothing that has been made public by the special counsel's office. We've learned that there were some Russian efforts to try to influence the election. There's been indictments against some Russian individuals, troll farms, people who did very minor efforts playing around with social media. But to the core question of whether or not the Trump campaign was in any way communicating with the Russians in an active effort to try to swing the election one way or another, there still remains no public evidence of that.
Mary, anything to add on that in the sense that we got the Trump Tower meeting famously with Don Jr. and Kushner and those Russians. We have the Steele dossier, and yet none of that has really been corroborated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why this sort of continues to spin is because Donald Trump had interests in Russia prior to becoming a candidate. And even during his candidacy, there was some conversations between people who represented him and the Russian government. So then you have Donald Trump getting elected, and he almost has this kind of knee-jerk need to show that nobody can push him around. So he keeps saying things like, you know, my friend Vladimir and so forth, and trying to show a kind of a camaraderie with Vladimir Putin. That hasn't helped him. I mean, in terms of actual evidence, I agree with Kim, but I also think that he could have done more to draw a very a straight line in the sand and just to show that he is not in any way allied with. I should
say I misspoke. Those meetings have been corroborated. Those facts those things did happen. They exist. The Steele dossier exists. What I mean is to say they haven't gone anywhere in proving.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And I think we should also add as a footnote, amidst all this, the Trump administration, especially the Treasury Department, has continued to impose significant economic sanctions on Russians and cronies around Vladimir Putin. That's just driving the Russians crazy. Those sanctions are biting.
Yeah, Kate, we did have a couple of big convictions this year. Paul Manafort, former campaign manager for the president; Michael Cohen, his former lawyer in private life, and and he's pled guilty. And the implication from the New York Attorney's Office, U.S. Attorney in New York, is that Donald Trump was aware of those campaign finance payments, they call them, and there may be a campaign finance violation by the president. What else have we learned?
Well, Paul, not much. I mean, what you're describing is that we've basically learned that Donald Trump associated with some very unsavory characters who were engaged in potentially illegal activity, some of which wasn't even related to the campaign. But none of that is involved with what Kim was describing as the central question of this, is whether Trump was working with Russia to influence an election. So I don't think that reflects well on, I don't think what we know reflects well, as Mary said, on Donald Trump's judgment and who he associated himself with in the campaign. But that's a far cry from what is being presented as collusion.
All right, Kim, let's all take a look at the other side of this, which is what we learned about what the FBI was doing in the 2016 campaign, investigating officials associated with the Trump campaign. In many ways, those were some of the biggest revelations of the year.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier about Congress's accomplishments. I should say this is one of the huge ones. The investigators in both the House and the Senate, in particular, Devin Nunes, and the work they did to uncover what the FBI was doing in 2016. And what we now know is that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, through a law firm, retained the services of an opposition research firm which was behind that Steele dossier. And they shopped it to the FBI, and the FBI seemed to have used it in large part as its justification to then spy, surveil, and open a counterintelligence investigation into the rival campaign, which that statement should be shocking to every American.
Well, where does it go? Where does those facts go? Are there going to be any political or legal implications for anybody at the FBI?
Well, look, I think we're going to have to wait until there's actually some final announcements. That's dependent on final information. That is dependent on Donald Trump declassifying some of these information. I think the question, too, of whether or not leadership at the Department of Justice is willing to do a thorough internal investigation and also be transparent with the public. We've got an inspector general who's doing some work. At that point, the question then becomes what crimes were committed. Were there crimes committed? The biggest one seems to be leaking. That is a felony if there are people caught to have been doing that. But other than that, it's a question, I think, of simply holding public officials accountable for their actions. And for that, we first need to know what they did in entirety.
Dan, we don't have a lot of time, 30 seconds or so, but what's the biggest risk in 2019 for Donald Trump from the Mueller probe? He's going to have that report to the Justice Department, almost certainly will leak. Is it that Congress will use it to impeach him?
Yeah, certainly it's the Congress will use it to impeach him, but the biggest risk is that Mueller does come up with a legal charge against him. And I just hope, Paul, that I think Robert Mueller, I still kind of feel, understands that a lot of American institutions have been damaged here, including the FBI. And what we want from Mueller is a full and fair accounting of what has happened, what are the results of his investigation, rather than overreaching to come up with a secondary legal charge against the President of the United States.
All right, Dan, I hope you're right. When we come back, our hits and misses of the year.
Remember, a decade ago, this was also Barack Obama's climate change ambition. He rammed a bill through the House. It played no small role in Democrats losing the House the next year. And that's because Americans have no interest in a climate change plan like this. Is going to add trillions to the economy, hurt economic growth, and make no measurable difference to climate change out there. So Nancy Pelosi better think real hard if she wants this agenda to be the face of her Democratic Party.
And Mary.
Paul, this is a miss for the economic and political disaster of the year. No, it's not Connecticut, but that came in a close second. This is Venezuela, where 2.5 to 5 million people have fled the country. The IMF expects another 2 million to leave this year. Hyperinflation might reach 1 million%. There are regular blackouts. There's no running water. Hospitals lack basic supplies. Things like blood pressure medicine and cancer drugs are impossible for average people.
And the cost?
The average Venezuelan has lost 20 pounds. How could you mess up a country that was so prosperous so badly?
And the answer is socialism.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Kate.
Paul, mine is actually, I think, what is the Trump administration's worst policy move this year, and it's slightly obscure, but it's an HHS rule that would basically look at tethering what we pay for certain drugs to what other countries pay. And Paul, I think that what that tells investors who are trying to bankroll the next cure for a disease is that price controls are coming. And if you're looking for a cure for Alzheimer's and you don't think you'll be able to recoup your investment, that is really going to change your behavior. So I hope the Trump administration backs off that route in the new year.
All right, Dan.
Paul, my miss of the year goes to the internet. And while we all know the internet is a wonderful tool, this is the year we recognized it comes with a sharp and dangerous edge. Mark Zuckerberg was hauled before a congressional committee to explain Facebook compromising individuals' privacy. A story circulated about parents in Silicon Valley not letting their children use the very devices and tablets that they have created because they think it's hurting their kids. And finally, all the stories about hacking, especially Chinese hacking, into America's institutions. I think seeing that the internet has a dark side, there's no answer to it yet, but that has got to be the beginning of wisdom.
All right, and I will add my miss is the shootings at Parkland and the high school there and the synagogue in Pittsburgh, not only for their murderous evil, but also because they may end up leading to some bad laws in the future that regulate guns for the law-abiding. We have to take one more break. When we come back, our panel's picks for hits of the year. Start us off.
So my hit of the year is on the news that the U.S. This year became a net exporter of petroleum products for the first time in decades. And again, take you back a decade ago, everyone, the doomer and gloomers, even President Bush saying alternative fuels, wood chips, we're never going to be in a situation headed toward energy independence. Thanks to technological revolution that includes horizontal drilling and fracking, we are experiencing a shale revolution. The U.S. This is great for the economy. It's great for our ability to affect foreign events and our relationship with OPEC countries. This is just a win all around for the United States, and it just keeps improving.
I do remember that wood chip economy. Whatever happened to that, Mary?
Hit for Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh for toughing it out despite the humiliating treatment that he got from Democrats during his confirmation process. Now, this isn't important necessarily because I think Justice Kavanaugh is so essential to the court, but if a smear campaign was able to defeat a nominee, it would destroy the process, it would destroy the institution, and in that sense, Justice Kavanaugh saved the court.
All right, thank you, Mary. Kate.
Paul, I'd like to give a hit to the researchers who won the 2018 Nobel Prize for Medicine for their work on immunotherapy. And what immunotherapy is basically unleashing the immune system to fight cancer. And FDA it's been nothing short of revolutionary in fighting cancer. We've used chemotherapy, which is highly toxic and really only modestly effective. And now FDA is approving new drugs under this novel approach that is much more targeted. I just think that amid all of the bad news of 2018, the human progress we're making on things like cancer is just incredible.
As long as we don't impose price controls in 2019.
That's right.
Okay. Dan.
Well, the Supreme Court is back for my hit, and this is for a specific case, and that was the Janus decision in June, which said that public employees cannot be coerced to make contributions to their public unions to support political activity. Believe it or not, Thomas Jefferson himself, a long time ago, said it was wrong to force people to pay to support political activity they don't believe in. Bringing this up to date, I'd like to make a shout out to former Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner, who actually, his name was not on this suit, but he initiated the idea to bring it. It was a huge victory for the freedom of public employees to be independent in their political thinking.
Yeah, I didn't win re-election, but that's a significant
He'll be remembered for it.
Legacy achievement. So my hit would be to American institutions. Remember the dawn of fascism that was supposed to hit us with the Trump presidency? Somehow the fascism never seemed to arrive. In fact, Democrats, we had an election, a fair election. Democrats won. They're not complaining about the results. So maybe American democracy works and maybe the Constitution holds up pretty well after all, and maybe will even in the next 2 years. All right, so American institutions. And if you have your own hit or miss of the year, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. Happy New Year. Next week and on into 2019.
Of the partial government shutdown over President Trump's border wall. Well, both sides remain dug in for now, but we hear that could change in the coming days. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Schein.
And I'm Laura Ingle in for Arthel Neville today. The impasse over the border wall set to drag into the new year, with each side playing that blame game we've been talking about as Democrats prepare to take the House majority Thursday. Nancy Pelosi, who has not yet wrapped up her bid to regain the Speaker's gavel, taking a vacation in Hawaii. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, today not missing the chance to slam Pelosi.
First, the Democrats have to come back. Nancy Pelosi needs to come back from Hawaii. Less hula, more moolah for the DHS, Customs and Border Patrol, funding our border security. They need to come to the table and do their job. A fully functioning democracy demands that both parties come together and that the Congress and the executive branch work together.
Ellison Barber is live at the White House with the latest on this. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Laura. So we just heard from South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. He was at the White House today having lunch with President Trump. He says they met for about 2 hours talking about Syria and also the government shutdown. Lindsey Graham said that he left the meeting feeling encouraged. At the same time, though, he said President Trump is firm in his commitment to make sure there is money for border security / a wall. He talked about the wall being used as sort of an all-encompassing term for border security. He said, though, that he felt in his discussions with the president that they talked about the importance of a deal, because he said there is no way that they are going to be able to get 60 votes in the Senate without giving something up for the Democrats as well. He said, though, despite that, again, he left this meeting feeling very encouraged. At the same time, though, he said he could not say when this shutdown might end. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
What I mentioned today as an outline of a potential breakthrough would be $5 billion for wall/border security, the Bridge Act, and TPS reform. I think that's in the realm of possibility.
So TPS, that would be temporary protected status. That's something that can be given to individuals who are here, who are not U.S. citizens, who for whatever reason it is unsafe, they are unable to return back to their home country. He also talked a lot about the Bridge Act, which is an act that, or a piece of legislation that was initially introduced and drafted by Lindsey Graham and also Senator Dick Durbin, that dealt with Dreamers, DACA recipients who had already received work authorization and temporary relief from deportation. Senator Graham said that not commit to anything here. Also, Syria was a topic at this lunch today. Senator Lindsey Graham, of course, has been a strong critic of President Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria. The South Carolina senator saying that he learned things today that made him feel better about where things are headed in regards to Syria.
I think the president has come up with a plan with his generals that makes sense to me. The goal is to make sure ISIS doesn't come back. We left Iraq too soon. We had them on the ropes in Iraq, left too soon. I think the president's very committed to making sure that when we leave Syria, that ISIS is completely defeated and we're inside the 10-yard line.
You know, I asked Senator Lindsey Graham, I said, not that we're not happy to see you over here, but he, of course, is a Republican and not a Democrat. And we've heard from Democrats that they have not been invited to the White House really in the last week for these negotiations. I asked why a Democrat wasn't with him today and if any had been invited. And Senator Graham said it's difficult for Democrats to come to the White House when they're vacationing in Hawaii. Laura.
Yes. No such thing as a slow news day over there at the White House, Allison. Thank you so much for that report.
Well, Laura, the back and forth over the president's demand for that border wall and the shutdown stalemate, of course, the two topics on the Sunday morning public affairs news programs this morning. The lawmakers may not be working on Capitol Hill, but it seems they have no problem running to a TV studio to talk about it. Garrett Tenney has more from Washington.
Negotiations between party leaders haven't been happening like you typically see during a shutdown, but behind the scenes, a number of lawmakers in both parties are trying to work out a deal. The current proposals include a combination of funding for the wall, a fix for DACA, and a number of other immigration provisions that Democrats support. The idea or the hope is that those additions could be enough to get a deal, but that was also the hope with a bipartisan immigration deal that President Trump nixed last year. And today on Face the Nation, Senator Jon Tester wasn't optimistic this time around would be any different.
I think we've been here before. I was in the room when the president said, if Congress passes something, I'm going to sign it, and then he moved back away from that. And so I think ultimately, in the end, we do need comprehensive immigration reform. There's no doubt about that, Margaret. But in the end, we need to know what the president wants, and hopefully he'll stick to it.
Senator Lindsey Graham is one of the lawmakers working behind the scenes to come up with a deal. But on State of the Union, he said the problem right now is Democratic leaders aren't interested in negotiating or trying to reach a compromise.
The bottom line is they want Trump to lose more than they want the country to win, I fear. At the end of the day, there's a deal to be had, but everybody's changing their position here, and most Americans are pretty tired of it.
Lawmakers are expecting negotiations will pick up later this week once the new Congress begins, but until then, the shutdown will drag on, and of course, the finger pointing across the aisle will continue. Eric?
All right, Garrett, thanks so much. Laura?
And authorities are arresting a total of 7 people now believed to have misled law enforcement about the whereabouts of the man accused of killing a Northern California police officer. Police say Gustavo Perez was living in the U.S. illegally and is a known gang member. He is suspected of shooting Officer Ranil Singh early Wednesday during a traffic stop. The Newman City Police Chief mourning Officer Singh's loss.
Ranil was just a kind man. I talked about our department being a family, and every family has the smiley, happy, jokester one, and that was Ranil. and that was taken from us, and it's been very, very difficult for our department.
Yeah, that was a heartbreaking interview this morning on Fox. Jeff Paul is live in Los Angeles with the very latest on this developing story. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Laura. Yeah, and in all, 8 people are now in custody after being arrested in connection with this case. The first most prominent jailing is that of Gustavo Perez Arriaga. He's the man who authorities say shot and killed Corporal Singh after being pulled over on suspicion of DUI. And then there are 7 other people, including the suspect's 2 brothers and girlfriend, who were arrested accused of trying to help Arriaga. Now, following the developments, Newman Police Chief Randy Richardson spoke with Fox News about losing one of his finest officers, one of just 12 in the entire department.
It's a tremendous blow. We're having our ups and downs. We have good days, we have bad days. Not everybody's having them at the same time. We've had incredible support from other law enforcement agencies stepping in when we need it to cover our streets because we're not able to handle those shifts. It's been a tough few days.
Authorities say the suspect was in the country illegally. In fact, they say he was making a run for the border the day he was arrested. Investigators also say he had previous arrests for DUIs and known gang affiliations. Several, now including sheriffs in the area, are calling out California's so-called sanctuary laws. Newman Police Chief Randy Richardson was also asked about that today.
I would hope that people out there find this tragedy for what it is. It's just a tragedy. I want to remember Ronil Singh and not really so much about everything else. It was a senseless tragedy. It could have been prevented. But unfortunately, we're here today having this conversation because it was not prevented.
Corporal Singh leaves behind a wife and 5-month-old son. The suspect, meanwhile, is expected in court on Wednesday. Laura?
Jeff Paul in our West Coast newsroom. Heartbreaking story. Thank you so much. We encourage everyone to maybe get online and look at SB 54 and dig deeper into what this story is really has a lot to do with. So thank you very much, Jeff.
Just an outrage. Well, immigration advocacy groups slamming Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, saying her tour of the southern border this weekend will not, in their view, change anything. That, of course, after the tragic deaths of those 2 migrant children this month, 3 weeks apart, while they were in U.S. custody. Secretary Nielsen calling for new protections for the migrants, but some fear their plans will not go far enough. Madeline Rivera has more from El Paso, Texas.
This visit is in any case is only damage control.
Immigrant advocate Fernando Garcia says Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen's visit to the border won't be enough, especially for the families of 2 Guatemalan children who died this month while they were held by CBP.
This is too late. I mean, and I don't know exactly what they're gonna do.
The deaths of 8-year-old Felipe Gomez Alonso and 7-year-old Jacqueline Cal prompted policy changes within DHS, including investigating the uptick in sick children crossing the border and expanding medical treatments and assessments. Nielsen slammed the immigration system as the cause for the spike in the number of families and children illegally crossing the border. Despite the changes, Garcia believes the crisis will continue.
This visit is not making any difference because the policy that is criminalizing immigrants, that is putting children in jails, is not changing independently of the visit of Secretary Nielsen.
Still, some, like Professor Todd Curry at the University of Texas, El Paso, say the Secretary's visit at least draws attention to the problem, which is better than nothing at all.
If Washington is looking at what's taking place, that's better than if Washington's not looking at what's taking place. The real question for me is there going to be some follow-through? Is there going to be carryover?
Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein is calling for a Senate hearing early next year to investigate the CBP's treatment of children. Eric?
All right, Madeline, thanks so much. Laura?
Eric, federal and New Jersey state prosecutors are looking into possible immigration fraud at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey. State prosecutors reportedly collecting evidence that supervisors at the club may have committed federal immigration crimes by handing out fake green cards to undocumented workers. Now, the FBI and special counsel Robert Mueller have reportedly played part in this inquiry. Trump Organization officials have declined to comment on these allegations as of yet.
Well, the House probe and the Republican allegations at the FBI and the Department of Justice had bias. With that probe coming to an end, The House Oversight and Judiciary Committee is looking into any possible pro-Clinton and anti-President Trump bias in the investigations of the Clinton email scandal and the 2016 Trump campaign, in light, of course, of those anti-Trump text messages between FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and other issues. Congressman Trey Gowdy and Robert Goodlatte, though, they sent a letter Friday to the Justice Department and the Senate Majority Leader reading, quote, "Our belief remains a special counsel should be appointed to investigate not only the decisions made and not made during the pendency of these investigations, but also the disparate ways these two investigations were seemingly conducted." The House Republicans have not produced a final report, but they are urging Congress to continue the investigation as Democrats officially take control of the House this coming Wednesday. They have accused Republicans of using their hearings for purely partisan and political purposes, pointing out the Democrats say that the Inspector General report claimed there was no evidence that bias affected the investigation.
Well, a new investigative report highlighting security failures in February's mass shooting at high school in Parkland, Florida. It's deeply disturbing. According to a state commission, students and staff at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High were vulnerable due to routinely unlocked doors and gates and the lack of a hallway PA system, which could have warned staff and students of the gunman. 17 people, as you'll remember, including students and teachers, were killed in the Valentine's Day shooting.
Well, a Tinder date takes a turn for the worst. Police reportedly say that YouTube fitness star Eric Seltzer repeatedly stabbed his date, Megan Tapley, inside his mother's home that's southeast of Boston. Seltzer died after police arrived and tasered him. His family is saying he's been suffering a, quote, a psychotic break days before the attack. Tapley is expected to make a full recovery, but police say she will need plastic surgery and an eye specialist.
Wow. As the battle over the border wall drags on and the government's still not back to work, could a compromise be in the works? It's being talked about now. More on that straight ahead. Plus, Times Square counting down to the big countdown for New Year's Eve. But will revelers face tricky weather? It's not sounding good, but the forecast for the big night will be coming up right after this. shutdown enters week number 2. There are indications a deal could be made, possibly including both border funding and DACA. Will we have? Most likely, we're going to have to wait until the new Congress comes in later this week. It's all about timing, right? Joining me now is the associate editor for the Wall Street Journal and Fox News contributor, John Bussey. Thanks for being here on a holiday weekend. We've got a lot to, you saw what just happened at the White House. You've got Lindsey Graham meeting with the president, having lunch. So what are you hearing about this potential compromise, and can we even call it that, really? This is discussions happening behind the scenes. We're hearing that several senators are involved now. The ball needs to move forward, but is this a start?
Yeah, so all those things are true, and it's unclear how much traction this is getting. A DACA deal and a wall, border security fence, whatever you want to call it, deal, it's been out there before. These have been options for the president and the Senate and the House to resolve this issue. It's been out there in the past. Whether or not the White House is going to look at the calendar and say, this time we're going to take this possibility a bit more seriously. Because come January 3rd, it's a Democratic House of Representatives. Right now they've got leverage. They've got Republicans that can pass a deal in the House that can be confirmed in the Senate, and the president can sign it. We'll see. Lindsey Graham has fielded this notion that you provide some assurance for continued residence in the United States for the Dreamers, those kids who were born here or parents who were illegal immigrants, in return for $5 billion plus border security, including the wall.
Right. Now, 2 senators went on morning shows today to discuss the standoff, as you mentioned. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Want to play a little sound of what he had to say about that. Listen.
Here's what I think might work. $5 billion for the wall/border security. Democrats have voted for more than that in the past. We have about 400,000 TPS people who came here from natural disasters in war-torn countries decades ago. Their visas are running out, so basically $5 billion for the wall, plus the Bridge Act, TPS, and some legal changes to do away with some of these magnets to illegal immigration might save the day in the Senate.
All right, then Republican Senator Richard Shelby today said that negotiations are at an impasse. So 2 very different takes on what's happening here, both from Republicans.
Right, and it's going to depend on what President Trump wants to do. The Democrats, it's interesting to kind of hear Lindsey Graham kind of sending up this trial balloon, trying to get some traction for an arrangement, again, that's been out there in the past and that he has supported in the past. But if the president is not going to be behind it, the Senate's not going to do anything until the president's very, very clear on what he will consider a signable deal. He may not want this. He may feel that doing something with the Dreamers disadvantages him with his base. On the other hand, the Democrats may say any discussion of a wall at this stage politically is not advantageous to the Democrats. So Nancy Pelosi may say, I'll give you border security and maybe $1 billion, $1.3 billion for border security, and that means technology and enhanced presence there, but forget the idea of the wall.
Right, and all of this, of course, a big portion of it, I should say, we're all talking about what happened in California with the police officer who was shot and killed by an alleged illegal immigrant who was pulled over on Christmas. Now, this, of course, brings up the border wall fight again in a very different light, very real light, with both sides. It's been a horrible, horrible time with this happening at Christmas as well. So there's outrage, but will this spill over into the new year? Will it remain fresh enough? It's fresh for everybody involved, but people want this conversation to keep going and make it a point.
Yeah, it's hard to say. This was a tragedy in California, the death of this policeman. How that affects this politically, it's unclear. There were 144 law enforcement officers killed in 2018, the majority by gun violence. Does this become an illegal immigrant debate or a gun violence debate? We'll have to see in the coming days. I'm sure it'll be played both ways by the parties, but no question this was a tremendous tragedy in California.
Okay, I've got to let you go, but really quick before I do, the shutdown, if you had to guess a timeline, when might it end?
The Democrats don't want it to end before January 3rd. The president is now talking pretty tough about shutting down all activity across the southern border. It's in his interest to get some kind of resolution before the Democrats take control of the House.
All right, an interesting start to the new year, that's for sure. All right, John Bussey, thank you so much for being with us today. Eric, send it back to you.
Oh, thanks, Laura and John. Russia and Syria responding to President Trump's sudden move pulling U.S. troops out of Syria. What they now plan. Plus, Release the FBI Jimmy Hoffa files. You know, that's what we've been calling for here on Fox News. It's all part of our Fox Nation special, Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa. The hour-and-a-half show also reports on the blood we found in the house in Detroit, where a mob hitman told me he killed Hoffa back in 1975.
Why do you think what we found in that floor is so important?
Well, what you found is all that's left of the body of Jimmy Hoffa.
Today, the FBI will not comment about the case, but with the informants likely dead, it is past time to release the secrets in full. The documents, made publicly available so far, have been heavily redacted. We should see what they say.
I would support any effort at full disclosure. A famous American who vanished from a public place in broad daylight. We need to know what happened. This cannot happen in America.
For more, watch my special on our streaming service, Fox Nation. Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa.
with Turkey on how to move forward in Syria. This is in response to President Trump's plan to pull roughly 2,000 American troops from that country. The decision sparking fears the early exit could empower ISIS and Iran. Trey Yingst is live in the Middle East Bureau with more on this. Hi, Trey.
Laura, as U.S. troops prepare to leave Syria, the effects of the American withdrawal are already being felt across the region. On Friday, Russian-backed Syrian forces entered the northeastern city of Manbij at the invitation of YPG Kurdish fighters. While previously these two groups have fought bloody battles in Syria, the Kurds fear a massive Turkish military operation once U.S. troops leave the country. On Saturday, U.S. coalition fighter jets were still flying over Manbij, but the future of the city remains up in the air. The city is a critical area, just 20 miles from the Turkish border, and Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has promised a major operation against the Kurds. Critics of President Trump say the U.S. troop withdrawal is a betrayal of Kurdish fighters who helped the United States defeat large parts of ISIS. Since 2016, local fighters backed by the United States have controlled Manbij after reclaiming it from ISIS. Residents of Manbij are now in a difficult position. They face either an invasion by the Turks or see the Syrian army take control of the city, both of which could lead to more violence in northern Syria. Now, a successful takeover of Manbij by Syrian government forces would be yet another victory by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who has seen somewhat of a normalization with countries in the region following a gruesome civil war. Just last week, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates announced that they would be moving embassies back to the Syrian capital of Damascus. Laura?
All right, Trey Yingst for us in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for that report. Eric?
Well, Laura, for more on this, let's bring in Dr. Rebecca Grant. She is a national security and military analyst, as well as president of IRIS Independent Research. Dr. Grant, always good to see you. You know, critics like Senator Lindsey Graham is at the White House today. Surely he told the president what he said in public, that it's a, quote, disaster in the making. It hands over Syria completely to Assad, Putin, and Iran, sells out the Kurds, and shakes our allies' faith. Or is the president making a wise decision, do you think? Is this a wise move by bowing to reality?
Well, let's put it in perspective. First of all, Trump sent about 2,000 additional forces with a bit more free tactical guidance, and they've achieved the mission that they were sent to do, which was to bring down ISIS. ISIS controls only 1% of the territory that they used to have. So I think the military forces in that specific region have already done what they do best. But Eric, please, let's remember that we are not pulling out of the region. We have 5,000 forces in Iraq. Our air power there is still very strong and still supporting activity on the ground. And we're part of that big Defeat ISIS coalition. What's happening here, though, is that we're going to see now if Syrian government forces will start to move into the northeast region and provide a little bit of that buffer between the Syrian rebel forces and the SDF and Turkey itself. It's going to be very complicated over the next few weeks.
But one of the concerns and worries, as you know, is this could definitely and does embolden the Iranians, and the Iranians advance and their push in Syria at potentially our expense.
Yes, and Iran's push across the whole Middle East region is one of the real tragedies of the last decade. We see often, earlier this month, an Israeli strike against Iranian forces inside Syria. So containing Iran remains very important. But the fact is that our U.S. forces on the ground have been operating in a small slice of northeastern Syria, and that's not an area that we want to hold over time. So I think what Senator Graham is saying is that he's looked at a little bit more of the intelligence with the president, and they're waiting to see if Turkey and the Syrian rebel forces and even Russia can work something out to make that a more stable area. In the end, it's going to be up to the Syrians to stabilize that country. And make no mistake, we can go back in there anytime if Iran starts to create more mischief than we can tolerate. Special ops ready to go anytime they're needed.
We're 2,000 of our special ops. Was that enough to try and hold the line against not just Tehran's expansionism, but Russia's, as well as Assad's seeming victory, despite the butchery and the catastrophic disaster and human catastrophe that he has caused?
Well, again, to be clear, there's 2,000 forces, some of which were special ops and some of which were regular army, were working in a limited area in northeastern Syria. It's past too late to deal with Russia's presence. They have 2 long-term military bases there, and Russia will keep Assad in power. That, unfortunately, was lost many years ago, back in the 2014-2015 timeframe.
What do you think should happen to prevent this? Should we bomb the runways after the teenagers, this all started because teenagers started spray painting and protesting, and the parents got mad, and then it just exploded. Should, at some point when the butchery started, that the Western powers, do you think should have bombed the runways to try and ground his helicopters so he wouldn't barrel bomb and kill his people?
Right, talking back to 2013, I think the Western powers now regret that we didn't take stronger action at that time. We had some good military options, and I think we regret now, easy to see. So what Trump did then was to try to augment forces just to clean up that rest of that middle Euphrates River Valley, and they've been very successful. They took back what they needed, and most of all, we went into Syria to secure Iraq and retake Iraq and make sure that ISIS couldn't use that part of Syria to overthrow Iraq. That was really our #1 objective, and that has been achieved.
There are concerns, of course, with 20 to 30,000 ISIS believers still believed to be there, that they will now reform, grow, and they could pose a continued threat to Europe and to our homeland.
Something we'll always have to watch, because ISIS is now switching from the geographic caliphate, which has been taken away, to a cyber caliphate, an attempt to use the internet to recruit. But again, they're down to a very small nub. That group may be there a long, long time. So it's going to be up to the rest of the Defeat ISIS coalition, which is still very active. Don't forget, France has about 1,000 forces on the ground there as well. The Defeat ISIS coalition has to rebuild Syria, help Syria stabilize, and tamp down both the cyber and any business-related activities that could let ISIS grow again. But having Iraq more secure will help with that a lot as well. And we still need to work closely with Turkey, very key NATO ally in the region, very key to our stance against Russia. So we have to make sure that Turkey can tolerate the security situation in Syria as well.
Do you think Turkey can really be trusted? I mean, Erdogan talks about, basically moving in and wiping out the Kurds. He sees, some of the groups as terrorists.
Yes, that's right. And even Secretary Mattis has said that Turkey does have some legitimate security concerns because of the Kurdish insurgency. So here is the question, Eric. Will Syrian government forces be able to create some stability in that region? Oh, so very uncomfortable. But Turkey is a hugely important NATO ally. In a military perspective, they're a great ally. They have forces involved in Afghanistan now. And of course, Turkey controls the whole southern part of the Black Sea region. So on a military perspective, we get along very well with the Turkish military, and this is something they have to be part of any solution.